Okay, so I didn't really know what I should post for my first video. I originally had another video that I was kind of working on. I wanted to talk about why I believe super speed is actually not a real superpower, but I realized that that video would take a lot of research. So I thought instead of talking about that, I should talk about something a little bit more easier to make for my first video. And what I'm going to talk about in this video is how I would beat the immortal snail. If you don't know what I'm talking about, this comes from an old Reddit thread that was asked a couple of years ago, and it basically just asks the question of there's an immortal snail that's chasing you, and you're immortal as well, and if it touches you, then you die. You have $1 million to start, and your goal is to survive for as long as you can. My goal with this video is to see how long I can survive for, but more than that, I want to see if there's actually a way if there's actually a way for you to theoretically come up with a strategy where you can live forever. Okay, so with that said, let's actually start the discussion. One of the requirements which I found to be really interesting is the fact that the snail is super intelligent. I think this is something that people don't really talk much about when they start talking about this question. But the way I see it, when we talk about someone being super intelligent, we're kind of talking about characters such as Iron Man or Batman, where basically super intelligence is used as a way for these characters to do things that are seemingly impossible. So, for example, they're super intelligent so they can invent time travel. They're super intelligent so they can solve some murder mystery. They're super intelligent so they can make teleportation, stuff like that. And that's the definition that I would be using for my snail as well. Now, you might be thinking that if the snail is this intelligent, then haven't we kind of already lost? The snail could easily create some kind of mech suit and just teleport in front of our doorsteps within like a year and just kill us. And it would be able to do that because it's intelligent enough to create a mech suit and invent teleportation. But the important thing to remember is that the snail can only do these things if it can actually use its intelligence. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Well, the most important thing to remember is the fact that the snail by itself is just a snail. All a snail can really do is just crawl around. Even if the snail has plans in his head on how he can invent time travel or, you know, invent teleportation, it can't really use its intelligence to actually do those things because it doesn't have hands. It doesn't have hands to actually mold any resources to actually create anything. Okay, so if this is the case, then how can a snail actually use its intelligence? How can it actually use its intelligence to do anything? Well, for it to actually use its intelligence, it would need some outsider's help. More specifically, help from another human. Okay, so I feel like we already kind of the discussion is already kind of becoming kind of weird. Like I'm kind of talking about a human potentially helping a snail in his conquest to kill this random guy. But let me explain. Okay, so there's two important parts to this. First is addressing whether it's actually possible for a snail to actually communicate with a human, and second, would it actually be possible for the snail to convince a human to even help it? And honestly, the answer to both of those questions is pretty much yes. For the first point, the snail could cover itself in paint and just write letters by crawling around on some surface. Or it could utilize Morse code, and it would know how to do both of these things because it is super intelligent. So if you were to do that, then that would show that it can at least communicate with humans. The next point is, would anyone even listen to the snail? And honestly, they definitely would. The snail has an unlimited number of tries to convince a human. The snail is immortal, so even if it fails, it can just try over and over and over and over again. It basically has an unlimited number of tries, but it only really needs one try to be successful. And the thing is, the snail doesn't even need to tell it all of its plans for it to convince someone to help it. For example, the snail could tell it that if you help me out, I can help you become super rich, or if you were to help me out, I can help you win the Nobel Prize in something. There would basically be a lot of benefit to helping the snail. And when this does eventually happen, the snail could tell the human to build some kind of mech suit, which actually has hands and can actually allow the snail to actually use its intelligence to actually build something. And once this happens, well, we're kind of back to square one because now the snail can actually use its intelligence, and now it can like create some kind of teleportation device and just teleport to where we are, and just kill us. So what can we really do? Well, the thing is, we can't really do anything. There's one thing I haven't really mentioned yet, and that is the fact that we're kind of making the assumption that the snail kind of just spawns randomly in the world, and it doesn't really spawn right in front of us. People generally like to say that this is a good thing because if the snail spawns somewhere randomly in the world, then they can basically wait a couple of years and just fly to a different country and just keep doing that over and over again. And since the snail will pretty much just be chasing them the entire time, the snail won't be able to reach them at all. Or they could basically just like hire a bodyguard to protect them from any snails that might come near them or something like that. But as I just explained, since a snail is super intelligent, it wouldn't really go around chasing you. That's why if the snail actually has freedom, then we would actually lose every single time. So because of this, we have actually kind of already lost. This is not really a discussion at this point because we can't really do anything about this. The snail would just spawn somewhere randomly in the world and we can't really do anything to stop it. So to actually have a discussion and to actually give us a fighting chance, we kind of have to make an assumption. And that assumption is that the snail just spawns right in front of us. Okay, so let's say we make this assumption. Well, what can we do next? Well, as I already explained, one of our goals should be to make sure that the snail cannot actually use its intelligence. One example of how we could do this is by taking the snail and just putting it into a metal box and just burying it under our own house. And then whenever we change houses, we could just remove the snail from under our own house and just rebury it under a new one. And if we just repeat this process over and over again whenever we change houses, we will always know where the snail is. Okay, so does that mean that we're done? We actually finished this question? That if we just take the snail and just rebury it over and over again, we should theoretically be able to live forever? Well, no, it's not actually as easy as that. One thing we haven't really accounted for is the fact that there will always be other factors outside of our own control that will always mess with us. For example, it's very much possible that someone close to us could betray us and they might just steal the snail, or our house would get destroyed by a natural disaster and our snail box would also get lost in the process. The point I'm trying to make here is that hiding the snail isn't really the problem, it's just making sure that we can keep it hidden for a very long time whilst dealing with all of these unforeseen circumstances. Another question you might have is that why are we even worrying about burying it under our own house? Why don't we just like put it into a metal box and just chuck it into the ocean, or maybe just like throw it somewhere far away from us? This is a common idea that I actually saw a lot of people talk about when they discussed their strategies on how to deal with a snail. But this is definitely not a good idea. As I already explained, we don't want to give the snail freedom because if it has freedom, it can use its intelligence. And you might be thinking that okay, but it's stuck in a metal box under under the ocean. How can it ever get found? Or maybe you buried it near Mount Everest and it would never get found there. And both of those options are very good and they would definitely hide the snail for a very long time. But the thing is, they both of those times the snail would get found eventually. For one, it's very much possible that if you were to throw the metal box in the ocean, it could just erode over time and eventually the snail would get freed. And once it gets freed, it would have freedom. Or even if that doesn't happen, it's very much possible that someone might just end up stumbling upon the snail. Like, for example, if you were to throw the snail into the Mariana Trench, then this a scientist team could just find it sitting there. I guess what I'm trying to say is the fact that it doesn't really matter where you hide it on Earth. There is always a chance that it will get discovered, and because of this chance, once it gets discovered, then we will lose every single time because then it has freedom. Of these examples, though, one of the far better ones that I actually saw is just throwing the snail into a metal box and just chucking it into space. And this is actually a pretty good idea. It would definitely be kind of hard to pull off, but if you can pull it off, then this would definitely be our best bet. Okay, so if you were to do this, then does that mean that we would win? That we would be able to live forever? Well, not really. The thing is, even then, there's still a chance that it would get discovered. And you might think that okay, but that sounds kind of impossible. But It actually isn't as hard as it may seem. For one, since a snail is kind of floating very slowly through space, the amount of distance that it would actually cover in its entire lifetime being stuck in space wouldn't really be that much. On the other hand, once humanity actually figures out space travel, the amount of distance they will cover in any of the spacecraft would be far more than the snail would be able to cover in its entire lifetime being stuck in space. What this really tells us is that it doesn't really matter where the snail ends up, humanity would still be able to reach the snail. Okay, but even so, just because they can reach the snail doesn't necessarily mean that they can find it. And this might actually be kind of true, but even then, it is a little bit more complicated than that. Whether they find the snail or not kind of depends on how far along the technology is. Like, it's very much possible that humanity will just come up with some kind of technology that might accidentally find the snail. For example, they might create some kind of technology that they would use to survey some area in space. And so, uh, one such time that they end up surveying some particular area in space, they end up finding this metal box just floating through it. And once they find this metal box, they will obviously, hop on the spacecraft and go and retrieve it. Obviously, though, this is a bit debatable since it would depend on the technology. But if I were to say that humanity would be able to conceive of such technology within the next 100,000 years at least, it does sound pretty plausible. The point I'm trying to make here is that even this plan isn't foolproof, and that there's always a chance that it would get found, and the chance is more likely than it may seem. With that said, though, I think that this would still be our best plan we have in order to actually get rid of the snail. So far, I've only really talked about the snail, and that is obviously very fair because the goal of the question is to deal with the snail and keep it away from me. But I think that one very important thing that people don't talk about is the fact that I'm immortal, and being immortal is a really big deal. If you assume that the rest of humanity doesn't know about us being immortal, then we are kind of screwed. The thing is, if humanity finds out that I'm immortal, then I will definitely lose this every single time. Once I learn that I'm immortal, they will try to figure out where my immortality comes from, so they might try to do human experiments on me and stuff like that. And since I'm only immortal, it's not like I have any other superpowers. I won't really be able to stop them from doing this. Plus, them learning about the fact that I'm immortal is something that can't really be unlearned. It's kind of like opening the Pandora's box, where once one particular generation of humans learn that I'm immortal, every generation from that one onwards will just forever know that I'm immortal. And eventually, after some time, the link between me and the snail will be established because the snail is pretty much where my immortality comes from. And they might do this by like spying on me or just like hypnotizing me or just, torturing me or something like that. Once they do this, then they will try to put resources into actually finding this snail. At this point, instead of having found this snail accidentally just floating through space or in the ocean, they would try to actually find it on purpose. So if you consider that, then the chances of them finding the snail would just increase drastically. Okay, so the main problem that we're dealing with is the fact that I'm immortal, and we need to try to figure out a way to prevent humanity from actually discovering that we're immortal. So, what can we really do? Well, we could try to live in the Mariana Trench ourselves. We would be kind of torturing ourselves because we would be in a state of drowning the entire time, but we would definitely survive because we're immortal. Or we could try to live in some uninhabited island. Or I could just go to space with the snail as well. But the thing that's common between all of these ideas is that any strategy that I made towards the snail getting found would just extend to me as well, because I'm kind of just hiding myself in the same places where I would try to hide the snail. So in this case, I would just get found. Plus, when I would actually get found, humanity would be really suspicious of the fact that they just see a human just surviving by himself floating through space without any oxygen, or a human living by himself in some uninhabited island, and that would definitely make us way more suspicious than if we were just trying to live among the rest of humanity. So, with that said, what can we really do that is better than us just throwing the snail into space, or maybe just throwing us into space as well and just hoping for the best? There's basically three main problems in this scenario. First is the snail using its intelligence. Second is not getting found out to be immortal. and third, the snail not getting found out to be immortal or at least somewhat special. All three problems are pretty difficult, but I think it's the second problem, and by extension, the third problem, which actually gives us the most amount of trouble. For example, right, let's say we can survive 50,000 years by just throwing this snail into space and just hoping for the best. And maybe we can throw ourselves into space as well, and that might also add like 10,000 years to those 50,000 years. Now, even though this 50 or 60,000 years sounds like a pretty good number, this number is pretty arbitrary. How long we can survive for would depend on how long we can stay hidden. And unfortunately, we can't really stay hidden forever. As more time passes by, and as each day comes and goes, the chance of us being discovered will just increase. And it will all culminate to a point where it is just inevitable that we will get found. It's like imagine you're trying to win the lottery and you buy one ticket every day. Now, if you bought on day one, you probably wouldn't win. If you bought on day two, you probably wouldn't win, and you probably wouldn't win on day three either. But as the days go on and you just buy one ticket every day, eventually you will win. That's pretty much what's happening here. That as long as the chance of us getting found is not zero, there will come a day when me and the snail will just get found. Now, you might think that, okay, but even if that is the case, 50,000 years or 60,000 years or whatever number you want to come up with sounds like a pretty good number. And that is probably true. But I would argue that this number is actually much less than you would actually expect. And that is because of one simple fact, and that is that unlike the lottery example, the probability of us getting discovered would actually change over time. What do I mean by this? Well, in the lottery example, the probability of us winning the lottery at any given day is always the same, but the chance of us getting discovered would just depend on how far along humanity's technological development is. If, for example, they have conquered several uh, galaxies and they have colonized a lot of space, and they go around a certain region of space where we're kind of hiding, then the chance of them discovering us is pretty high. If we instead talk about 500 years ago, around 15th century times, then space travel isn't even a thing. You can't even go to space during that time. So in that case, the chance of us getting discovered in space would actually be zero. But now fast forward 500 years and space travel is a thing. So the chance of us being discovered would definitely not be zero. It would definitely be pretty low if we consider today's technological developments, but it would definitely not be non-zero. That's why since the probability of us getting found on any single day isn't really the same, it would just increase over time as humanity's technology just gets better and better, and it will just culminate to a point where we will just get found. What this example really shows is that it's really hard for us to come up with a solution where we can hide ourselves for a very long time, because it doesn't really matter where we hide ourselves, we will get found eventually. And that's what makes the second and the third problem really difficult. Okay, but with all of that said, can we actually do better than just chucking ourselves into space or the snail into space? And honestly, you might be able to. One potential solution to this problem would just be to throw the snail into a black hole and kind of just hope for the best. Since the snail is immortal, it wouldn't really die, it would just get stuck. Now, you might debate about what would actually happen to the snail, like maybe it might get stuck or maybe it would just go to a different dimension. And you can debate about that because we don't fully know what happens inside of a black hole. But regardless of what we actually may or may not know, we will know for sure that the snail wouldn't be able to get out. At this point, even if I discover to be immortal, it wouldn't really matter anyways, because I can only really die by touching the snail, and since the snail is in a black hole and can't get out, I would just be fine. So because of that, if I can get to this point, I can live my life even if I tell everyone that I'm immortal. Now you might be thinking that okay, but there could be some kind of technology that could exist that humanity could actually use to fish the snail out of a black hole, and that might definitely be true. I think that this is very plausible, but even if such technology existed, it would definitely be a very resource demanding piece of technology, and I would argue that I am not sure if humanity would be willing to use such technology just to get a snail out of a black hole. They might be willing to do that, but they may not be. So this would depend on a weighing the advantages versus the disadvantages in this particular situation. Okay, so let's say if we can get to this point, would we actually win? Well, not really. I didn't actually know this before, but black holes can't actually live forever. They can survive for around these many years, and once the black hole ends up dying, the snail would be able to get out. And once this happens, we would actually lose. This would happen because humanity would actually know where the black hole is and also when the hole would die. So as soon as it dies, they would send a couple of spacecraft to go and fetch the snail. And when this happens, then the snail would have freedom. And when it has freedom, then I would just die. There would actually be another problem with this solution as well, and it is something that I didn't really think of at the time. But it is very much possible that humanity could just end up throwing me into the same black hole that the snail is in. If this happens, then you could definitely make the case that I would actually die. Now, I didn't really think of this because it's a very unlikely scenario, and there wouldn't be really any incentive for humanity to actually do this. But still, this is definitely a very real threat, and if humanity ends up doing this, then we would definitely just lose. But with that said, there would actually be a solution to this problem, and that is that I could throw myself into a different black hole, a black hole that's different to this nail. I just kind of let myself just sit there for a very long time. Obviously, I would be torturing myself doing this, but I would definitely be extending my lifespan, so this would definitely be a very good solution. And that is kind of where our run would end. Our best bet, and the one which can extend our lifespan the most, would just be to throw the snail into a black hole, and maybe ourselves into a different black hole, and kind of just hope for the best. Obviously, though, this is so far removed from reality that I don't actually think that this is a feasible solution. This solution is basically asking me to get into a spacecraft, fly a couple of light years away, throw a snail into a black hole, then fly a couple of light years to another black hole, throw myself into a black hole as well, and just kind of hope for the best. This solution is so far removed from reality that I don't really think that it is possible to pull off in any capacity whatsoever, and it's definitely not very practical at all. I don't think that even if I were to live my life like a billion times, or probably more than a billion times, I would be able to pull this off. So if you're talking about it from a practical standpoint, this is definitely not the best solution, but this would definitely be the best theoretical solution that can actually increase our lifespan the most. Our second best option, and the one that's actually more practical, would just be to throw the snail into space and us into space as well and just hope for the best. But with that said, that's kind of all I have to say for this question. If you guys actually have a strategy which you think is better than the black hole one, or just throwing the snail and me into space, then I'll be extremely curious to know. Especially if you have one which can guarantee that there's a 0% chance that the snail would get found, or I would get found, or something along those lines. If you actually have a strategy like that, then let me know because I'm actually really curious. But that's all I have to say for this topic. Um, I'm not sure what the next video will be. I want to ideally do the super speed one because I think it's super interesting, but it would require a lot of research. So maybe I might make a couple more. So maybe the next one might be something a bit easier again. We'll see. But that's all I have to say. I'll catch you guys in the next one.